Tell me about your career background and what led you to be interested in mind-body medicine.
I have a PhD in organic chemistry. Now, it's nothing at all to do with organic foods. An organic chemist basically plays the child's Lego game, but we do it with atoms. So with Lego, you take a yellow brick, a green, a blue, a white, and you build up structures. So an organic chemist does exactly the same, except my Lego bricks were atoms. So we would take like a bunch of carbons, hydrogens, nitrogens, oxygens, etc., and create a shape of a particular geometry and set of qualities. So people like me end up in the pharmaceutical industry. So I worked for one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, developing drugs for cardiovascular disease and for cancer. And although I loved doing what I was doing, I loved the science of it, but what fascinated me more so, I would say, was what happens when you test the drugs. So let's say in a typical trial, you might give 100 people a drug to show that it works. So you've also got to give 100 people a placebo for comparison purposes. And you might get, say, 75 people improving on a drug. But it's not uncommon to get 40, 50, 60, 70, 74, 75, sometimes even, depending on the nature and the size of the trial, also improving on the placebo because they think they're getting a drug. And I thought, whoa, it's amazing. So after seeing the same thing time and time again, I spent a lot of time in my spare time while in the industry just researching, looking into different aspects of the mind-body connection. Of course, starting with the placebo effect. So eventually I just left the job and decided I want to educate people in the mind-body connection and write about it.
Talk to me a little bit more about the placebo effect and the nocebo effect. I feel like we should be doing research on how to exploit the placebo effect in a positive way, and unfortunately doctors use the nocebo effect without realizing it. So can you talk about that?
I think overall the placebo effect is extraordinarily powerful because what we see here is belief itself shifts biology. And I don't think that's taught enough in medical schools. One of my friends years ago who was a doctor mentioned that in the entire time at medical school got like half an hour of a lecture on the placebo effect, and it was just about the ethical considerations about prescribing a placebo and nothing to do with the power of believing something, the power of hope even, and the power of language, even the effect of the way in which you communicate something, how that can bring out about a placebo effect. And they didn't learn anything like that. So I would love to see more of that kind of stuff being taught, because sometimes unmeaning to, a doctor can take away all hope altogether. In fact, I spoke with someone recently who said the doctor just took away all of my hope, and by being clinical about the thing, and all I had was my hope. And sometimes that's all people have. They just have their hope. That's all they're clinging on to. And I think what we don't understand is, statistics always follow, the classic bell curve, and most people fit the middle. There's always people at the end of it defying the odds. And what we should look at is what are they doing? What are they doing differently from everyone else? And oftentimes it's that determination and maybe some mental and emotional stuff that they're going through that's having a beneficial effect. And I think if we understood that better, if medicine itself understood that better, then doctors would actually be able to harness that kind of stuff in how they communicate. I mean, empathy, for example, is one of the most important things. I mean, we now understand if a doctor shows empathy and says to someone, you'll be fine. I think you'll be fine. We just take this medication, really believe in this, and just shows warmth, emotional warmth in their personality. That actually causes the person to believe more, and empathy itself then actually amplifies the placebo effect. But sometimes when there's too much clinicalness about it and without the empathy, then a patient can walk away feeling not listened to and not heard, and therefore part of the patient's recovery might be their belief in the doctor. And so if the doctor hasn't showed much empathy, then the patient might think, well, I don't think this is going to work, and their own belief then can have a detrimental effect on what they're actually trying to accomplish. The word placebo comes from the Latin. It says, I shall please. And the word nocebo is its opposite. People call it the evil twin. And nocebo comes from the Latin. It says, I shall harm. And just like the placebo effect, you believe this will help, and it does. The nocebo effect is when I believe this will make me worse, then so it does. And some doctors unwittingly tap into the nocebo effect just by the use of language. There was a study in the British Medical Journal a number of years ago called The Power of Positive Consultation. And it was all about looking at the language used by doctors. And they found that over a period of time with different doctors for a range of different things, if the doctor used positive language, where he or she said, you know what, you'll be fine, and they showed bits of empathy, for example, you'll be fine, you know, nothing really much going on, if you take paracetamol or aspirin, you'll be fine, and if by chance you're not, then come back and see me in a few weeks and we'll see what else we can do. So that was called the positive consultation. The negative consultation, on the other hand, was when a doctor said, well, for the same conditions, I'm really not sure what's wrong, so I'm not really sure if this will work, but if you could try it, some paracetamol or aspirin, if it doesn't work, then come back and see me. And what they were showing was kind of negative language and negative expectation. I'm really not sure about this. Whereas the positive consultation was saying, look, I'm sure about this, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. Nearly twice as many people who get the positive consultation were symptom free in a month versus those who got the negative consultation. So the language itself had a dramatic impact on the symptoms of the patients. So I think if I had a medical school program, I would be teaching medical students and doctors about the power of their language. You know, use of language. I would teach them a greater understanding of the placebo effect. And rather than the placebo effect, I sometimes use the word placebo mechanism, meaning how it works. Because it's not, placebo effect sometimes conjures up this notion that it's just a floaty, you know, psychosomatic thing that isn't really real. But placebo mechanism is hard and factual. It's all the different ways that your thinking and your beliefs cause a biological effect in the brain and also throughout the body. So I would be educating about the placebo mechanism and some of the ways that we can tap into it, some of the uses of language and the uses of just helping a person to believe or feel a certain thing that can have an actual healing effect. So that's what I would be teaching, is the placebo mechanism, all the different aspects of the mind-body connection, especially the use of affirmative, positive language, knowing that having positive, affirmative language can have a healing effect.
And on the other side of that, a doctor saying statistically you only have 20% chance of survival beyond 2 years, I feel that's more unethical than giving someone false hope by saying you're going to be okay, because that hope is powerful enough to change the biology, whereas you say you only have a small chance to make it. Most people are going to follow that.
I spoke with an oncologist a while ago, and he was telling me that he points out to his patients that there's at least one example of a spontaneous remission from every single known form of cancer at every single stage. And he tells that to the patients because he knows that that gives people hope. And sometimes hope is what people need, because out of hope comes a belief that I can do this, I can find a way. Whatever I have to do in my life, I can find a way. And that itself actually has beneficial effects. And that's why he talks about these spontaneous remissions to the patients, to give them hope.
I think that's brilliant, because he is not lying. That is a fact. It's something he feels comfortable saying, so that's not unethical, and it gives people hope. I think every single doctor should say that. And then it's like, how determined is that patient to want to believe that they too can do it? The doctor's belief in a drug actually affects how the patient believes in it and how they communicate.
If a doctor believes in a medicine, then he or she will communicate that belief in their language and their mannerisms and their empathy even, and therefore the person will take on board that belief. That person's belief will amplify the effects of it. Because if you take any medicine and let's say it's that good, when you believe in the doctor or what he or she communicates to you, then you can take the same drug and make it that good. But on the other hand, if you really don't believe in it because maybe there was no empathy, maybe everything was too clinical or hope was taken away, then you can take the same medication and suppress the effects of it. And ultimately, the difference between the best it could be and the worst it could be is actually in your head. It's in how you feel, it's in what you think. And that's something we know very well from pricing and packaging of medicines. In the UK, we have a basic paracetamol, which is about, say, that good. But they fancily pack, based on a study done in aspirin a number of years ago, which you can translate to paracetamol, that the fancy packaging ones, they're 10 times the price. But because they're 10 times the price, they work better. Because we have a little story in our heads that says, if something's more expensive, it must be better. And we've had the practical experience in our lives. I think everyone's had the experience that you pay an extra little bit for a better pair of shoes and they last longer, or a better pair of jeans or a better top, and it lasts a bit longer. So we've had the direct practical experience that if you pay more for something, it works better. But that translates into taking medicines. If you pay more for a medicine that perhaps looks fancy and well packaged, and it's rather than flimsy paper, cardboardy capsule snaps in half in your hand when you open it, you've got something that's really, it's thick foil and you've really got to peel it off, and you think, whoa, this is a really heavy duty, high quality stuff. And your own belief about it, because it's more expensive, actually makes it work better. And it's like, you know, the brain is like a pharmacy. And it's like a person, say, believes that they're going to have, say, relief of pain, for example. So it's like your mind causes your brain to look through its pharmacy and say, okay, what will deliver of all of my different chemical substances here in the brain here, what will deliver what the patient wants? And so they're expecting a relief of pain. So what will provide that? I know that stuff there. And it turns out it's the natural version of morphine, called endogenous opiates, and that gets released into the body. So the person gets a pain-killing effect because the brain already has what it needs to deliver what they're expecting to occur. And that is such a powerful thing, because it shows that expectation, belief, what you're thinking about can actually have all of these different biological effects in the body.
If you could talk about what conditioning is?
Conditioning is like when a person's belief is amplified over a few days. So, for example, there's research that shows a person might be given morphine for pain, say for 2 or 3 days, and then on the 3rd day, it's secretly swapped for a placebo, just salt water. Yet the person gets the same degree of relief of the pain, just because over that 3 days, their belief is stronger. So it's been conditioned in them. So ultimately what conditioning does is it really strengthens and reinforces a belief. And one of the things that it demonstrates is belief itself, if you can find a way of lifting its power, of amplifying it, can reach deeper into the body's systems to deliver more powerful results. And I think if we understood the power of conditioning better in the mainstream and actually used that partly in a therapy, one of the things I've written about in the past is that perhaps we can even reduce the expense that our health services pay for certain conditions, not for everything, but for certain conditions, secretly swap the drug on the 3rd or the 4th day, or after a period of time when expectation and belief is built to a level that might reduce the amount of drug that a person actually needs to take.
If you designed a private medical program, what would you add or change?
If I was designing a private medical program, I would add to the mainstream medical training, I would add a series of lectures in all aspects of the mind-body connection. So not just the placebo effect, but all the research that shows that even if I think of my fingertip, I look at my fingertip, I actually stimulate my fingertip. And if you look at the brain, the region of the brain for the fingertip is immediately stimulated. And so there's a connection between the brain and the body facilitated by your attention, what you're thinking about, where your mind is pointing in. So I would teach that. I would talk about, we all know that you can be in a stressful situation and you create all these stress hormones in your body, or you can be in a calming situation and just think of the stressful time, reflect back on it, and you produce exactly the same effect, all these different stress chemicals. But the other side of it is, you can be in a loving environment with someone, time when someone's showing you gentleness and compassion, and you produce a little hormone called oxytocin in the brain. And you also produce it in different regions of your body. It's known as a reproductive hormone, but it's also a highly powerful cardiovascular hormone. It's actually called cardioprotective, and that means protects the cardiovascular system. So you can be in a loving environment with someone, a warm emotional contact, and you produce oxytocin, or you can be sitting calmly thinking of a time, reflecting on a time when you felt warmly emotionally connected with someone, when you felt love or affection or generosity of spirit or any type of heart-centered feeling like that, and oxytocin gets released into the body. One of the amazing things that it does is it actually changes the shape of your blood vessels. It physically changes the shape. It causes your blood vessels to go sound effects as well. But blood vessels actually change in shape when oxytocin goes into your arteries. And another side effect that occurs of oxytocin is it sweeps the crap out of your arteries. Now, crap, that's a technical term for the two groups of chemicals that actually produce cardiovascular disease. So they're known as free radicals, or oxidation is another name for that, and inflammation. And studies on oxytocin shows that it actually directly reduces this oxidation, this free radical, and it reduces the inflammation. So when you're in a loving environment, because you produce oxytocin, it delivers these benefits to your heart, to your cardiovascular system. But also, even when you're sitting calmly somewhere and thinking about that loving environment, that person who showed you generosity of spirit or kindness or compassion, you also deliver these benefits to your heart. So I think if I was, designing a course for medical schools, then in addition to the placebo effect and this effect of placing your attention anywhere in your body and stimulating that part, I would be teaching about the effects of love and compassion and kindness and the health-giving effects of those, given the fact that heart disease is the biggest killer or one of the biggest killers. So knowing that through thinking and behaviour you can deliver benefits to the heart, then I would absolutely have that as a central part of the teaching.
What kind of awareness can you give to people about drugs? Like, what are the positives? What are the negatives?
I entered the pharmaceutical industry as a young scientist, and I just wanted to cure cancer. And it turns out that most of my friends and colleagues in the pharmaceutical industry, all the scientists, they also just want to, a lot of them cure cancer. They want to save lives. It's only when you get higher up in the company that the goals begin to change. And I learned a very valuable insight one day, because I emailed the chief executive of the company, and I was talking about this, that the scientists want to save lives, but why is it not the same at the top? But he was a very nice man, and he explained to me how it works for them. He says, one of our primary targets is shareholder value, but he said, that's my job. I actually have to deliver shareholder value because the company, I don't own the company. He said it's actually owned by shareholders, which is driven by the market itself. So it's us in our own life recycling back on ourselves as we strive to save money in stocks and shares, and that itself, he said, drives the profit thing. So he said the reason why they have one of their primary targets is shareholder value is because of that. And I just thought I could see such a discord between that and where the scientists were, like myself, who'd come to the industry to save lives. And there is a wee bit of a discord in what the goals are, I suppose, because every large company must deliver shareholder value if it's not a privately owned company. So that's one thing I learned in the industry. But one of the things that I think is really great about drugs, and despite the fact that I talk about the power of the mind and I'm very interested in holistics, as an organic chemist, I also understand there's great value in many of them, because one of the things an organic chemist does is build something of a particular geometry. And the way these things are discovered is, let's say you go into a rainforest and you find a root or a plant and you mash it up and you extract, maybe there's 100 compounds. A compound is a name for just a substance. So there's 100 compounds in there, and you test all of them, and you find that one of them works really, really well for, say, cancer or it's an anti-inflammatory. And then it comes to an organic chemist who then works out the shape of it, the geometry and the qualities, and then providing we retain that shape and that geometry, you can make a million versions. So you can put a few atoms on here, a few on there, take a few off there, and do lots and lots of different fancy things, providing you keep that geometry. And then you test, let's say you've made 1,000 variations and you test the 1,000 variations, and then you find one or two that are 100 times more potent than the original one. And that's the one that eventually becomes a drug. So the benefits of drugs in that sense, especially for people with chronic conditions where you can deliver very quickly something that's very, very powerful. The downside with things like this is nature itself. I think there's a reason why there's 100 compounds in the plant. And out of those 100 compounds, the one or two or three together deliver the main benefit, but the others carry out some other roles that in some way maybe protect a person from side effects. And so sometimes, even though the drug itself can be highly powerful for chronic conditions, there can be collateral damage, which we all know about with the number of side effects. So the plus side of it is, for chronic conditions, a drug can be highly powerful, more powerful than the natural product, but the side effect is the collateral damage that you get that is usually missing when you take the natural product itself, because the natural product does the job that it's supposed to do, but somehow seems to moderate and balance out the side effects at the same time. Because I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I was a scientist. One of the things that I've done is I've researched a lot of peer-reviewed mainstream science. So everything I write about is peer-reviewed and mainstream, partly for the reason that I want to create a bridge between people who have an interest in holistics and alternatives in the mind, a bridge between that and the mainstream. So oftentimes I stick to peer-reviewed scientific studies, because then there's less skepticism. And I find by doing that, I'm able to create that bridge really, really well. So even when I talk about the pharmaceutical industry, I tend not to be dishing what they're doing, because I do remember the 100 or so scientists that I knew as friends and colleagues, nice people who really just want to save people's lives. I went into the pharmaceutical industry because I wanted to cure cancer. That's why I didn't take an academic position as a professor. I wanted to go into the industry where I felt I could actually do something that could contribute to saving lives.
Do you think there's a future or a way for organic chemists like yourself to develop drugs that are a little bit more conscious about side effects? Can the industry go to where pharmaceutical companies can still profit, but the collateral damage is reduced?
Yeah, I think there's potential for more research into what is it about the natural products, not just the individual single thing that we find that works against, say, cancer, or it's an anti-inflammatory or something, but what is everything else doing? And how does the combination of the different natural products together deliver the benefit? And so I often wonder if we spent more time working out what the combinations are and what's providing that balancing effect that's taking away the side effects. Perhaps there's mileage there in building, even organic chemists, building stuff that does provide the balancing effect, that does get around the side effects without minimising the effect or reducing the effect of the actual drug itself.
I feel love and gratitude are like some of the most powerful healing forces, and generosity of spirit and kindness and how that actually affects your biology. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
When a person is in an environment where they feel love, or even when a person's thinking about that environment, thinking about a time when someone showed you love or affection, or when you felt close to someone, it could even be an animal like a dog or a cat or a horse even. It's the feeling itself. It's the love, the compassion, the affection that you're feeling itself. You produce oxytocin, the hormone in the brain, you produce it in your heart, you produce it in reproductive organs, and it delivers fantastic benefits to the heart. So it changes the shape of blood vessels, it sweeps out some of the precursors to heart disease, keeps the arteries healthy. It also plays a role in digestion, and it helps us to digest our food better. And it also plays a role in healing. I mean, some research shows that if a person has had a marital conflict in the hours, say the 48 hours leading up to an operation, then wound healing is slowed. And it's because oxytocin actually plays a role in healing of wounds. It plays a role in the regrowth of the blood vessels that are involved in, repairing a wound. So, and it plays quite a substantial role, actually, 30 to 40% in some cases. So what you find is we turn off the oxytocin supply when we've had like a relationship conflict, when if we're thinking aggressively, or if we're thinking hostile or angrily towards someone, towards a person or an animal. So we switch off the oxytocin tap. So without that oxytocin required to protect the cardiovascular system, to help us to digest our food better, it also slows down the healing process as well. So healing can be accelerated, so to speak, when we are thinking of love, compassion, gratitude, affection, kindness, generosity of spirit. So love itself is the most wonderful, beautifully healing thing. And I love that science is now showing biologically what some of these effects actually are. I think of self-love as an inner sense of worthiness and value. And I think we start out when we're young, as children, having that. But somehow as we grow up through the way that life happens and society works and what we learn from people, we kind of lose most of that. and we lose that inner sense of worthiness and value. We spend half our lives trying to get it back again. But one of the great insights in the brain and body connection is that you wear how you feel on your body. So when you feel happy, you don't say, oh, I feel happy. What does that do with my face? Oh, yeah, I smile. You don't remember to smile and remember to tug on the zygomaticus major muscle or the orbicularis oculi muscle. You don't remember to do that. It's a reflex reaction because the muscles on your face are wired to, they're connected to the emotional circuits of the brain. Similarly, if you feel stressed or angry, you don't say, what did I do in my face again? Oh, I better do that and crease the corrugator superciliary muscle and tighten my jaw and tighten my shoulders. You don't remember to do that. It's a reflex reaction because the muscles are connected to the emotional circuitry. By that connection, you literally wear how you feel all over your face, all over your body. So when you don't have an inner sense of worthiness and value, it will come across in your body language, in facial expressions, in particular environments, around particular people. And over time, as we hold our bodies in particular ways, we literally wire the circuits of the brain. And so we literally wire in body language that says, you know, I'm not good enough or I'm not enough. And we literally wire that in. So a fantastic tool for wiring in an inner sense of worthiness and value is decide, what would my body be doing if I had this inner sense of worthiness and value? If I completely know that I am enough, well, my shoulders would be dropped, I'd have my back would be straight, shoulders dropped, my head would be up, I would smile, my facial muscles would be relaxed, I'd breathe comfortably. And the key is to practice doing that relentlessly, like every day. Do it at least a couple of times, at least once in the morning, stand in what people call a power pose. That was after Amy Cuddy, the Harvard professor, got people to stand in a Wonder Woman power pose. And actually by doing that, you wire the brain circuits for that if you practice it consistently. But consistent practice of adjusting your posture, straightening your spine, relaxing your shoulders, relaxing your face, keep your head up, eyes straight ahead, all the body language aspects of saying, I am enough, I have an inner sense of worthiness and value, and practice it every single day as often as you can remember to. Then after just a period of short weeks, it could be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever, what happens is you literally have done enough wiring in the brain. It's called neuroplasticity. Enough wiring in the brain that body language is now a habit. And because the muscles are connected to the emotional circuits of the brain, what's also a habit is feeling an inner sense of worthiness and value. So it's a fantastic way to literally build that feeling, that inner sense of self-love, simply by adjusting your posture and your body language as often as you can remember to. I think for some people, when we're lacking in self-love, we can experience a lot more stress in our bodies and lacking in energy. And when you're lacking in energy and when you're feeling stressed, it's not the best for healing, whatever it is you're healing from. And I think when you work on that inner sense of worthiness and value, your energy levels go up. And what comes up with that is your insights and your creativity and your belief in yourself, your belief in whatever process you're actually doing in life. So I think self-love, that inner sense of worthiness and value as it applies to healing, can only be a good thing. Giving and generosity makes you happier, regardless of what the condition or circumstances of your life. Giving, helping people, being kind, actually scientific studies show it does actually make us happier. Also makes us healthier in our bodies as well. For the heart, the immune system, there's an argument to say even that kindness itself slows the aging process, because kindness and compassion is an anti-inflammatory. There's research on that shows that compassion itself is an anti-inflammatory. Because compassion is an aspect of kindness, you can actually say that kindness itself is an anti-inflammatory. Inflammation drives the aging process to a degree. So you can actually say ultimately that kindness and compassion slow the aging process. I've been practicing it for 91 years. I just dye my hair white, grey at the sides to make myself look my age.
You're so funny.
I think I've spoiled it, haven't I? But you can cut that, can't you? You can cut that.
It's funny. Let's talk about visualization. I love visualization. I think it's super powerful.
There's fantastic research at Harvard University where they asked volunteers to play 5 notes on a piano. So they had to basically, with each of their fingers, go plunk, 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 and just play these 5 notes for a period of 2 hours on 5 consecutive days. And they had their brain scanned every day. And the scientists homed in on the area of the brain connected to the finger muscles. And what they found, amazingly, is that the area of the brain connected to the finger muscles actually grew like a muscle. It was like you're literally working out. And the area of the brain directly connected to the finger muscles actually grew in size. And by the 5th day, it had grown in volume by like 30 to 40 times. It's called neuroplasticity. It's the brain literally grows on account of what you're doing. But a separate group of people, instead of playing the notes with their fingers, played the notes with their mind. So what they were instructed to do is imagine the finger muscle movements, not actually move the muscles, just imagine moving the muscles, imagine hearing the sound. 2 hours on the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They also had their brain scanned every day. And it also, the area of the brain connected to the finger muscles also grew like a muscle. And when you compared on the Friday, on day 5, the areas of the brain of those who played the notes with their fingers with those who imagined playing the notes, they were exactly the same. And if you mix the slides up, you couldn't tell the difference. In other words, in many ways, the brain does not make a distinction between whether you're doing something or whether you're imagining doing the same thing. And that's the power of visualization. There's several pieces of research. I mean, nowadays, all elite athletes, without exception, use visualization as part of their training program. I know that for 2 reasons. I used to be an athletics coach myself. I was a coach and the manager of one of the UK's largest clubs. I was the under-20s male team manager. We had, at that time, we had 8 people in the Olympic Games. So you learn what elite athletes are doing. But secondly, I spoke at a corporate conference last year, and I was the next speaker after Sally Gunnell, the Olympic gold medalist in the 1992 400 metre hurdles. And she said that 70% of winning the gold medal was mental. A large part of visualization. And every single day, she visualized herself running her race, the perfect race, running. She visualized the high knee lift, running, driving her legs, shoulders over the hurdles, particularly visualized the last 50 to 80 metres when you're exhausted. And she visualized herself lifting her legs up. And when she crossed the line, she looked like a sprinter. Her body, her form was so great. And she was the first British athlete to use visualization and obviously won the gold medal after that. But a raft of scientific studies have now shown that visualization can be applied to all manner of different things, especially stroke, Parkinson's disease, spinal cord injuries have received a lot of research because they're rehabilitation. And so a typical study would have people who've had a stroke, not just recently, but it could be up to like 10, 15 years ago. And everyone gets a 6-week course of physiotherapy. But half of them, in addition to the physiotherapy, they do 3 or 4 times a week for maybe half an hour to an hour at a time, visualising. And what they do is, let's say the person has impairment to the right side. So for that half hour, that 3 or 4 times a week, they've to imagine eating an apple, moving the arm, or picking up a cup of tea, drinking the tea, or turning the pages of a book, or stretching the arm. But they've to visualise actually moving the impaired limb. And at the end of the 6-week study, what you find is those who did the visualisation recover far more movement than those who just did the physiotherapy. And it's because the brain cannot make a distinction in these terms between whether the person's actually moving or whether the person's imagining that they're moving.
So for healing a disease, kind of what would a tool be, or simple visualization?
The actual practice of visualization for illness is very simple. For several years, I've been collecting stories, testimonies, interviewing several hundred people who've used visualization as some part of their healing journey. And amazingly, what like 99% of them do is you take an internal picture of illness and convert it into an internal picture of wellness. And that's it. It's illness to wellness. That's it. And they just do it over and over and over again. So to give you a few examples of this strategy of illness to wellness, people who are even getting chemotherapy, imagine the chemo drugs as little piranha fish going and nibbling at the tumour. But in their mind's eye, what they're seeing is the tumour getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller till it's gone. People in radiotherapy imagine the radiation like bolts of lightning going pum, 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 and burning chunks out the tumour. But again, tumour's getting smaller and smaller and smaller till it's gone. Some people use the illness to wellness strategy by imagining tumours as like snowballs melting on a hot stove, or I think we've all had the experience of melting a snowball under a hot tap, or ice under a hot tap, and it gets smaller and smaller. So people use that image to effect the smaller and smaller in their imagination. And the key is to do it over and over and over again. People with arthritis, imagine taking fine sandpaper and sandpapering their joint and smoothing the joint and polishing it and then putting oil and lard in it and making it nice and soft and smooth. People with cardiovascular disease, imagine walking through their arteries with a steam cleaner and hosing and steaming and cleaning down their arteries. And when all the crap comes out, they sweep it up and put it in bin bags and they take them out and remove them from the body altogether. There's a lady who told a really nice story one time. She had tumours and she imagined there was a rabbit in her body that loved the taste of chocolate. So she imagined the tumours were made of chocolate. So in her mind's eye, she imagined this rabbit would come in and lick the tumours because they were made of chocolate. And so in her mind's eye, she saw the tumours getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until they were completely gone. And it gets even better. When the rabbit was full up, it bounced out of her body, it went into the woods, and it relieved itself. And then that became fertiliser. And in time, after several visualisations, a tree had grown where the fertiliser had been dropped. And she put a label on it in her mind's eye that said the healing tree. And she invited sick animals to come and receive healing from the tree. So she actually recycled the entire experience to facilitate her recovery. So all people that use visualization basically use that same system. It's illness, an idea of illness, and convert it into an idea of wellness. How you imagine what wellness looks like and illness looks like is entirely up to yourself. In fact, you can only do it right. Providing your end product is wellness, you can only do it right. And you just do it over and over and over again, illness to wellness, illness to wellness, illness to wellness, several times. You can only do it right.
What is a couple more powerful healing stories that you've experienced, witnessed, helped?
I met a gentleman a few years ago who had a seemingly incurable condition called myasthenia gravis. It's an autoimmune condition where the immune system attacks a little chemical in the brain. And let's say the way it works is the chemical's got to get from one nerve ending to another. It's like one side to the other and it's got to swim across. But what happens is the immune system, when it's halfway across, it grabs a little chemical and destroys it. And that causes all of these symptoms, very serious symptoms. And him and I met and he worked out a visualization for this. And in the visualization was that he imagined he was camped out in his brain and he had a child's pop gun. You know, the ones that shoot the corks. I always caution against the use of violence. He wasn't using an Uzi 9mm. I always caution against the use of violence in your own body and your own imagination. So he was using a child's pop gun. And in his mind's eye, when he saw a piranha of the immune system about to gobble this chemical, he shot it in the bum. Enough that it got distracted. So as it got distracted, it completely missed the chemical and allowed the chemical to get from one nerve ending to the other. And he did this every day, sometimes for an hour a day, sometimes half an hour. He spent a lot of time every day just repeatedly camping out in his brain and never once ever allowing a piranha of the immune system to gobble this chemical. Anyway, doing that every day for 11 months, in concert actually with he was getting homeopathic treatment and vibrational medicine treatment. And between the two, the visualization and this alternative treatment, he was completely cured. In fact, his consultant, his hospital consultant actually said, "You are the only person I have ever heard of who has completely recovered from myasthenia gravis." And I'll share with you another example of a man whose body was badly smashed up in a car accident. He had a fractured skull, broken shoulder, several broken ribs, his pelvis was split, his hip was split, his right kneecap was actually round the back of his knee. He spent a lot of time in rehabilitation and he started to use visualization. And every day, because he had nothing else to do really, especially in his condition, and every day he took a tour round different healing factories. And he was like the foreman on the building site. And he imagined going into his brain, his skull, where the fracture was there. And he imagined all these different reconstruction workers like pulling bits of broken bone together. You know, like stalagmites and stalactites. And he was imagining that these different bits of the bone were being threaded back together. Hundreds of them sealing the fracture. And then he would do something similar with the broken shoulder, with the rib cage. And then he'd have reconstruction workers at his pelvis. He'd get to his hip, and he imagined these reconstruction workers not just lightly sanding it, but French polishing it as well, and then oiling it up. And every day he would take a tour around the different factories where all the reconstruction work was doing in the early days of rehabilitation. his doctors had said, if you work really hard, there's a chance that in 5 years from now, you might have an 80% of your movement back. And they said, are you okay with that? And he said, no, I'm going to run the marathon next year. And he did. After doing that daily visualization, he ran a marathon 18 months later. And during that 18-month period of time, he did visualization every day, touring around the factories, watching the reconstruction work done. He's doing his physiotherapy, but he's also visualizing lengthening his muscles, as well as doing all the exercises. He's spending a lot of time in his head, touring around this factory, repairing all the individual bits. And by the time 18 months later came of the marathon, he was so well recovered that he actually ran the marathon in just over 4 hours.
Wow. That's so inspiring, though. Can you talk about how, like, because you're a scientist, you know, on the quantum level, we're just vibrating energy. So thinking from that way, energy is changeable, right?
So if you look inside any part of your body with a microscope, so let's say your hand, and you look inside your hand, you find cells. You look inside the cells, you get your DNA in the center of the cell. You look inside the DNA, you find atoms. You look inside the atoms, there's nothing there. Well, there's protons, neutrons, electrons, croutons, and morons. No, there isn't croutons and morons, but there's protons, neutrons, and electrons. And what's amazing is inside an atom, there's 99.9999999999999% empty space. That's 13 nines after the decimal point empty space. If a proton was an apple, the size of an apple, the closest electron would be the size of a grain of salt, and it would be approximately 2 kilometers away. So imagine an apple and a grain of salt 2 kilometers away, now rotating around. And that's where that figure of 99.9, that's how much space you would get. Simple pi r squared. That's how much space, 99.999% empty space. And the particles themselves, they actually emerge in essentially out of what's called the quantum field. And ultimately you can think of particles as just waves of energy, just literally vibrations of energy. So sometimes it's a good quantum shift for people in their minds when they move away from thinking of something as seemingly solid and impermanent, because, you know, solidity, when you think of an illness or a disease or an injury and it's physical and solid, it conjures up all these ideas of what solidity has. It's lasting, it's permanent. But sometimes when you imagine, if I was to take my imagination inside the cells, inside the DNA, inside the atoms, down to the quantum field, and imagine the same thing, then ultimately everything is vibrations of energy. And I think sometimes just making that little quantum shift in your mind, everything's made of energy and vibration, energy, waves of energy, and it shifts your mind from thinking that something is seemingly solid and permanent, so perhaps something can change and something can be healed. And I think it's that perception shift, that belief shift in people that can pack a good punch.
You want to just briefly describe quantum field healing and maybe a story where it applied? I
created a visualization several years ago. I just call it quantum field healing, because we take our imagination into a part of the body that's diseased or ill or injured, and we imagine going in through the cells, DNA, the atoms, the particles to the quantum field, and we picture, instead of thinking of the disease or the illness or the injury as something solid, we picture it as waves of energy, and we imagine waves of illness and we convert them into waves of wellness. And it's such a simple, just mental process. We simply turn waves of illness into waves of wellness. And for some people, it feels like it delivers more power for them, because it's the connotations of solidity feel like it's stiff, it's solid, it's never going to change. But shifting waves of illness into wellness feels, it taps into people's beliefs that I can do this. It creates hope and belief that I can do this. The reason I came up with this actually is I was interested in how fast the body is capable of doing amazing things. And I knew that some placebo effects, like pain-killing effects, for example, can take place within seconds. And some placebo effects can be rapid, and you can have spontaneous remissions and stuff that are quite rapid. You also have the condition called dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. And what dissociative identity disorder shows us is that when a person moves from one personality to a completely different, distinct personality, what follows that change sometimes is biology. You know, allergies, for example, is a well-known case where one personality was allergic to orange juice, And in the presence of a psychiatrist, hives, an allergic reaction appeared in his arm. And then, as the personality shifts, the hives all disappeared again. So you can have one personality with a condition, and one, as the personality changes, and that condition, the symptoms seem to vanish. And I was exploring all of that and thought, what this shows us is belief is so powerful that it can facilitate really incredible things, and sometimes very fast. So that's where I came up with the idea for quantum field healing. I thought, it's a way surely that we can shift people's mindset away from the seeming solidity and permanence and the idea of this, it's solid, it can't change because solid things are kind of stuck and impermanent. That's just something we subconsciously assume. And take the mind out of that altogether. Imagine the same thing from a quantum perspective, and there's nothing there. It's waves of energy. And waves of energy in your mind, they feel easier to change. Just like you can be in your bath and you can simply move your finger and create the waves. So in our subconsciously, we understand that waves are easier to change. So I think what quantum field healing does is it allows people to deeply believe, I can do this. And so sometimes for some people, it is exceptionally powerful.
And people have been able to do that remotely on other people.
Yeah. In fact, I remember a lady at a workshop who did quantum field healing for her 4-year-old daughter who was asthmatic. And she emailed me like a fortnight later to say, I don't understand it, but my daughter hasn't needed her inhaler at all. I remember one time a person recovered completely from short-sightedness. Their eyesight spontaneously improved by doing a quantum field healing meditation. What happens a lot is people suffering pain during the quantum field healing. It seems to be for a lot of people very good for pain, and a lot of people report almost an immediate relief of symptoms of pain.
Do you want to give us the really succinct version of what the quantum healing is? Just walk us through like a speedy version.
So the quantum field healing visualization, we take our attention to the part of the body that you want to focus on. And you imagine that you're inside your cells. And you imagine what they would be like. Now, we all imagine it in our own way. Some people see like high definition. Some people just kind of feel and sense. However you imagine, you're doing it right. Because we all imagine uniquely. So you imagine the cells, then imagine going inside the cells to where the DNA lives. It's like the yolk of an egg, the DNA is in there. And imagine what it's like, and either seeing it, sensing it, feeling it. And then imagine going inside the DNA to the atoms, and then we imagine going into the atoms to the subatomic particles, the protons, the electrons. You can picture them like the night sky, actually, because that's what it would look like if you could see it. It'd be like the night sky. And then we imagine going inside the star, a proton or an electron, and dropping down to this field of pure energy, the quantum field, just waves of energy. And then we imagine waves of illness, because everything ultimately, all atoms, all things ultimately arise from the quantum field. So therefore the waves of the vibrations of the illness will ultimately come from here in some place. So you imagine waves of illness, what they would look like, either seeing them, sensing them, feeling them, and just imagine they just go poof, gone. And then replace them, just cancel them, and replace them with waves of wellness. And imagine what these beautiful waves of wellness would be like. And then we just bring our attention back to the night sky, but seeing the stars now, almost coloured with wellness. Bring our attention back to the atoms, and imagine the atoms that almost like coloured with wellness. We bring our attention back to the DNA. Imagine the DNA now coloured with wellness. The same for the cells. See the cells coloured with wellness. Back to where we started in the body. And when we get back to where we started in the body, we imagine that part of the body in a state of complete wellness. And it's quite a simple process. Into the body, down to the quantum field, change the waves, come back out of the quantum field to where you started.
Now just walk us through a 2-minute version.
So you take your attention to the part of the body that you want to work on, and imagine going inside of that part of the body, and imagine what that would be like. Now, you might see, or sense, or feel, or hear, however you imagine. And then imagine going inside that part to your face-to-face with the cells, and imagine what the cells would be like. Either see them, sense, feel them. Imagine now going into the centre of the cell, where the DNA lives, and imagine what the DNA would be like. Either seeing it, sense, or feel the DNA. Then imagine going inside the DNA, because it's made of atoms, and imagine what the atoms would be like. Either see, sense, or feel the atoms. Then take your attention inside the atoms to the night sky. And the stars that you see in the night sky are the protons, the electrons. And then imagine going inside a star and dropping down, down, down into the quantum field. A sea of complete stillness, just pure waves, calm waves of energy, of pure energy. And then just imagine waves of illness, which ultimately arises from the quantum field, because all the particles that create it arise from there. Imagine the waves of illness, what they would be like. Either see, sense, or feel them. And then just mentally say, cancel. And just imagine the waves of illness gone, eradicated from the fabric of space and time itself. And then just imagine, just like you can drop a pebble into a pond and create waves, imagine a star of any colour that comes to mind, any colour that represents wellness, and drop the star down, down, down into the quantum field. And as it lands with an om, creating waves of wellness now moving out from the centre of the quantum field to fill the quantum field. Notice the colour of the waves, the depth of the waves, how fast they travel, texture. Are they making any sound? And then do the same again. Drop the same star of wellness down, down, down. And as it lands with an om, creating waves of wellness again, moving out to fill the quantum field. Again, bringing your attention to the colour of the waves, the texture, the sound, the depth, the speed, as they fill the quantum field. And for the third time, dropping a star of wellness down, down, down. And as it lands with an om, creating waves of wellness again, moving out to fill the quantum field. Again, noticing the colour, the texture, the depth of the waves, the sound, the speed. And now that, because everything arises from the quantum field, and the quantum field is now filled with waves of wellness, we bring our attention back to the night sky and notice what's different from the way in. Notice any changes in colour, texture, sound in the night sky. And because the protons and electrons combine to form the atoms, we bring our attention back to the atoms and notice any changes in the atoms in colour, shape, texture, sound, and trust that what you see or sense or feel is confirmation of a shift. And because the atoms come together to form the DNA, we can bring our attention back to the DNA and notice any changes in colour, texture, sound, movement, shape. And we can also trust that what we see, sense or feel is confirmation of a shift. And because the DNA combines with other parts to form the cells, we can bring our attention back to the cells and once again noticing any changes in the cells from the way in, any changes in colour, texture, sound, shape, size, and trust that what you see, sense or feel is confirmation of a shift. And as we bring our attention back to where we started in the body, just imagine that part of the body in a state of total wellness and trust that what you see, sense or feel is confirmation of a shift. And then we just bring our attention back to our breath and open our eyes when we're ready.
What is your one takeaway message for healing?
My one takeaway message for healing would be to educate yourself about the mind-body connection, because your mind exerts an extraordinarily powerful impact on your body 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And if we educate ourselves in how that occurs, how that works, then we can actually start to harness the mind-body connection by choosing what direction to focus our minds in.